Yinka was the kind of man whose name opened doors. At 32, he was already a Lagos big boy with multiple successful car dealerships, a chain of luxury shortlets in Lekki, and several political contacts. His flamboyant lifestyle was only rivaled by his generosity. On social media, he was known as the King of December, always seen throwing lavish parties or giving out money during the festive season. But behind the smiles and spectacle, Yinka was still connected to his roots in Sagamo, Ogun State. That December, he decided to visit the village for the first time in nearly a decade. His homecoming was a spectacle. As his convoy of sleek black SUVs rolled into Sagamo, children ran behind, chanting his name. Elders came out with coconuts and palm wine to bless him. He distributed bags of rice, cash envelopes, and Ankara fabric to the widows and elderly. The villagers couldn't stop praising him. To them, Yinka had become a legend, a boy who went to Lagos and came back with the stars. Among those who received from his bounty was Mama Ifan, an old woman in her late 60s who had once been married to Yinka's late uncle. She lived alone in a mud house at the edge of the village and was rarely seen outside. Her hair was always wrapped in a faded scarf, and her voice was as quiet as wine through dry grass. When Yinka approached her and handed her an envelope containing 50,000 Nigerian nairas, she looked up at him with expressionless eyes and muttered a strange blessing under her breath. "May the earth take what it is owed," she said. Yinka didn't understand her words, but he chuckled, waved it off, and moved on to the next household. By New Year's Day, he returned to Lagos, unaware that his life had just been cursed. Lagos had always been kind to Yinka. Contracts came easily, connections were a phone call away, and his face was a favorite at elite parties and on lifestyle blogs. But barely 2 weeks after returning from Sagamo, things began to change. A major deal he had been working on for months suddenly fell through without explanation. Then his imported car shipment was seized by customs over a mysterious discrepancy. He still thought it was coincidence, bad luck, perhaps a spiritual attack from jealous rivals. But as weeks turned to months, the cracks widened. His landlord gave him notice over unpaid rent. His business accounts were frozen due to an ongoing fraud investigation he knew nothing about. Within 3 months, Yinka went from champagne brunches to begging friends for food. By May, he was squatting with a distant cousin in a cramped one-room apartment in K2. He had sold his last car and used the proceeds to survive. With no job prospects and all his investments gone, Yinka began hawking pure water in Lagos traffic, hiding his face behind a cap. The once flamboyant millionaire had become a ghost in the city that once adored him. Friends abandoned him. Family stopped taking his calls. Desperation sank into his bones. He began to lose weight rapidly, not from a new diet, but from hunger and humiliation. Every night, he asked himself the same question: what did I do wrong? His salvation came in the form of Tosin, an old childhood friend who had heard of his downfall and insisted he visit a secluded prayer house known for solving mysteries beyond human understanding. Yinka was skeptical, but he had nothing left to lose. The journey to the prayer house took them through dusty outskirts and narrow footpaths just outside Ikorodu. It was a secluded place, surrounded by bushland and echoing with distant chants and bird calls. The air felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the space itself knew the weight of the burdens people brought there. Yinka had grown up skeptical of such places, believing that faith should reside in hearts, not huts. But the pit he had fallen into had stripped him of pride. The prayer woman was unlike anyone Yinka had ever seen. Clad in white from head to toe, her hair tightly covered, her eyes piercing yet kind, she said nothing for the first few minutes. Instead, she walked in a slow circle around him, sprinkling something that smelled like burnt herbs. Then she whispered a single word: "Sit." When he did, she knelt before a carved stool and poured a black powder into a shallow wooden bowl. She lit 3 candles, red, white, and black, and called out in a language Yinka didn't understand. The air in the room seemed to shiver. Then, without asking any questions, she looked up and said, "You helped someone you should not have." December. In your village. Yinka's mouth dried. Yes. I gave many people money. I was only trying to help. She was not grateful. She was angry. Envious. She tied your fortune in a pot, placed it beneath the ground, and summoned your downfall. Tears welled in Yinka's eyes. But why? I gave her money. The prayer woman's voice turned sharp. Not everyone who is poor is innocent. Some are wolves in rags. This one is old, connected to your family. Your uncle's widow. Yinka's heart began to pound. He remembered Mama Ifen's cold eyes, her cryptic words. May the earth take what it is owed. It now made horrifying sense. She took more than your fortune, the woman continued. She has tied others. Some remain unmarried. Others are dying slowly. If the pot is not broken, she will outlive your destiny. Yinka dropped to his knees. Please, help me. What should I do? You must return. The land must speak. Let the youth chairman call her. The people must witness. If she denies it, the fire will not. That night, Yinka didn't sleep. He saw flashes of Mama Ifen's face in his dreams, her mouth whispering curses into the wind. He woke with one resolve, to return to Sagamo and face the one who had destroyed him, and this time, he wouldn't be alone. Yinka arrived in Sagamo on a dusty Tuesday morning, far from the celebratory return he had experienced the previous December. This time, there were no convoys, no cheering children, no elders with blessings. He came alone, in a borrowed Danfo bus, carrying a small bag and the weight of betrayal. The village had not changed, but Yinka had. His face was leaner, his eyes darker, sharpened by hardship. He walked straight to the house of the youth chairman, Deli, a strong, respected man in his early 40s known for his boldness and loyalty to justice. When Deli opened the door and saw Yinka, he stepped back in shock. Yinka. You. What happened to you? Yinka explained everything, the rise. The fall, the prayer house, the old woman's curse. Deli listened in stunned silence, his jaw clenched. When Yinka mentioned Mama Ifen, Deli's expression darkened. That woman, he muttered, there's always been something about her. People avoid her. Chickens die around her house. Children cry near her fence. We've ignored the signs. By evening, Deli had called a meeting. The village square buzzed with whispers and murmurs as people gathered. The youth stood in a circle, torches in hand. Mama Ifen was brought in, dragged by two young men. She didn't struggle, she walked slowly, her scarf tied tightly, her face as expressionless as before. Deli stood before her. Mama Ifen, you are being accused of using juju to destroy Yinka's life and tying the destinies of others in this village. Do you have anything to say? She looked around the crowd, her gaze lingering on Yinka. Then she spat on the ground. Lies. All of you are fools. I am an old woman. What power do I have? The crowd grew tense. Some shouted for her to confess. Others hesitated. Deli turned to Yinka, who nodded. The next phase began. They bound her feet and brought out the native instruments of truth, burning coals, sacred leaves, and iron rods. If she was innocent, tradition believed, the gods would protect her, but Mama Ifen remained silent, her lips sealed even as her feet were placed above the fire. She bit her lip but made no sound. The villagers looked at each other, confused, afraid. Was she truly innocent, or so powerful even pain couldn't touch her? Then Deli called for the final act. An iron rod, heated until red hot, was brought forward. She will speak now, he said grimly. or she will never see again. As the rod approached her face, Mama Ethan let out a scream so sharp it silenced the night. Her eyes widened, and in that moment, something inside her broke. Yes, she wailed. I did it. I cursed him. I cursed many. I buried their names in the pot. Let them suffer like I have suffered. Let them feel what I felt. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Women wept. Men stepped back in horror. Yinka stood frozen, staring at the woman who had stolen his life, and yet, it was only the beginning. The morning after the confession felt unreal. Sagama was eerily silent, as if the entire village held its breath. Word had spread like wildfire, not just of Mama Ethan's curse, but of the decades of hidden destruction she had unleashed. Women clutched their children tighter. Men avoided eye contact. No one dared to speak her name aloud, as if it still carried venom. Yinka had barely slept. His body was numb from exhaustion, but his spirit burned with resolve. The prayer woman had said the curse lived in a pot, buried in the earth. Until it was destroyed, the chains on his destiny would remain. So, as the rooster crowed, he met Deli and a few trusted youths beside the village square. Armed with machetes, shovels, and a holy bottle of anointing oil, they made their way to the edge of the village. Mama Ethan's compound. Her mud house stood crooked, leaning like a forgotten tombstone. The grass around it was overgrown and wild, as if untouched by human feet for months. No one lived there now. After the confession, the elders had banished her to the outskirts, where she was to await judgment from the traditional council. Some swore they saw shadows moving inside her house even after she was gone. Others claimed the wind around the compound whispered names in the dead of night. Yinka didn't care. He stepped into the yard first, his footsteps crunching on dry leaves and old bones of chickens. The others hesitated at the gate, crossing themselves. Are you sure about this? Deli asked, his voice low. Yinka didn't answer. He knelt and placed his palm on the earth, just as the prayer woman instructed. She buried it where the sun meets shadow, she had said, beneath the crooked pawpaw tree where nothing sweet grows. And there it was. A twisted pawpaw tree stood near the edge of the fence, its bark blackened, its fruits shriveled like curses hanging from branches. Yinka walked to it and pointed. Here. They began to dig. The earth was stubborn, thick with old secrets and resistance. Sweat poured from their brows as shovels struck roots and stones. Minutes turned into hours. Just when doubt began to whisper, Yinka's blade hit something hollow. A thud, different from earth or wood. He dropped to his knees and dug with bare hands. Slowly, a clay pot emerged, dark, cracked, and humming with dread. Strange symbols were etched into its surface. It smelled like rot and burnt hair. Deli recoiled. Oliver, oh, he muttered, making the sign of the cross. Yinka's hands trembled as he lifted it. Inside were pieces of paper, names written in shaky script, tied with red thread. Some were burned at the edges. One had his name, Yinka Adebayo, written in charcoal. Others bore names of people he knew, a cousin who died mysteriously, a friend who went mad, a girl who vanished the year she turned 18. Tears filled Yinka's eyes. This wasn't just about him. This woman had poisoned generations. The prayer woman's instructions echoed in his mind: do not open it where you dig it. Take it far. Let fire meet prayer. They carried the pot to a cleared space by the river's edge, far from homes and footsteps. A small fire was made, surrounded by palm fronds and white cloth. The youths formed a circle. Yinka poured the anointing oil over the pot, then held a lit torch over it. For every soul bound, he whispered, be free. The pot cracked as the flames touched it. Then it shrieked, an ungodly sound, not from clay but from the spirits it held. The air turned violent, winds circling like angry bees. Some of the boys screamed. Delhi stood firm, chanting prayers. Yinka dropped to his knees, shielding his face. Then, silence, the pot was gone. Ash. The wind stopped. The air was still. Yinka looked up, tears mixing with sweat. For the first time in months, he felt light. Back in the village, chickens crowded again. Children laughed. The curse had lifted, not just from him, but from Sagama itself. But Yinka knew the battle was not over. Some things do not die in fire, some wait. In silence. Lagos was never the same again. Yinka returned not as the golden boy of Lekki, but as a man hollowed out by betrayal, spiritual warfare, and the bitter knowledge that kindness, when offered to the wrong person, could kill more than one's joy. It could kill destiny itself. Though the curse had been broken and Mama Ifan was dead, her shadow clung to him like damp cloth. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes watching. At night, in the silence of his small rented room in Bariga, he heard whispers that seemed to echo from the grave. He tried to rebuild. Applied for contracts. Reached out to old friends. But the door stayed shut. His name no longer carried weight. Some whispered he had been involved in occult things. Others simply said he had lost his luck. Lagos, a city that thrived on perception, no longer saw him. Tosin, the friend who took him to the prayer house, remained his only true companion. They would sit sometimes, on the wooden bench outside a sewer spot in Ilupaju, sharing roasted meat and memories of a time when Yinka could buy the whole joint and still tip the seller 50,000. But those days felt like stories someone else had lived. One rainy afternoon, Tosin asked, "Bro, if you could go back, would you still give that woman the money?" Yinka paused. The question had haunted him more times than he could count. "I don't know," he finally said. "They teach us to give. To help the poor. To be generous. But no one tells us that not every beggar is innocent. That some people are not just poor, they are poisoned." He sighed, watching the rain hammer the zinc roof above. "I gave her money to honor my family. To be a blessing. But I think some people don't want help. They want revenge. And if you walk into their darkness with light, they'll just swallow your flame." Tosin was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. "Still, I think you're better than her. Even if she killed your joy, you didn't let it kill your soul." Yinka didn't reply. That night, he dreamt of a forest, dense, wet, silent. In the middle stood Mama Ifan, naked, her mouth stitched shut. Behind her was a crowd of faceless people holding calabashes. They each turned to him and whispered in unison, "We take what we are owed." He woke with tears in his eyes and a name on his lips, his own. Years passed, Yinka never regained his old glory, but he found a quieter life. He started a modest business selling car parts in Mushin. Not the flashy showrooms of Lekki, but enough to eat, enough to live. He married late, to a nurse who didn't care for status. They had one daughter, whom he named Orioluwa, meaning God's gift. Every December, he refused to visit Sagamo. He would instead take his family to a church camp, or a quiet beach. And whenever he saw a beggar or an old woman stretching out a hand on the road, he paused, not in fear. Not in anger, but in memory, because Yinka was no longer a rich man, he was a rich man's ghost, walking through life with caution, humility, and the kind of wisdom that only pain can buy, and that, he knew, was a wealth no curse could ever steal. 5 years after the curse was broken, Lagos had forgiven Yinka, but he had never fully forgiven himself. The past clung to him not in headlines or whispers, but in the quiet moments, when he watched his daughter sleep, or when his wife hummed old Yoruba lullabies in the kitchen. He had survived, yes. But something had been taken. Something he couldn't name. Then came the letter. It arrived in a brown envelope, tucked beneath the gate of his modest bungalow in Mushin. There was no return address. Just a sheet of paper with a simple message, written in delicate handwriting, "Come to Sagamo. The earth is bleeding again." His hands trembled. He hadn't seen or heard from anyone in Sagamo in years. Even Delhi, who once promised to keep in touch, had stopped calling. Yinka had buried that part of his life. Or so he thought. That night, he sat alone, staring at the letter. His wife, Bola, noticed his silence but said nothing. She had learned, over the years, that some battles followed a man into dreams. And Yinka's dreams were often crowded with shadows. By dawn, he had made his decision. He kissed Oriolua on the forehead, told Bola he needed to check something, and boarded a bus to Sagamo. This time, he didn't take a car. He wanted to arrive quietly, unseen, like a ghost visiting its own grave. The village had changed. Or perhaps, like him, it had simply aged. The old chief had died. The youth chairman, Delhi, was now a father of 4 and walked with a limp from a mysterious bike accident. But the fear in the villagers' eyes was familiar. "Yinka," Delhi said when he saw him. "You shouldn't have come back." "I got the letter." Delhi didn't ask which letter. He only sighed and led him to the edge of the village, where a crowd had gathered beneath a neem tree. On the ground lay the body of a young girl, no older than 16. Her eyes were wide open, her mouth frozen in a scream. Around her neck was a thin rope of cowries. "She was found this morning," Delhi said. "Same spot Mama Ifan was buried." Yinka's heart began to race. "But she's dead. We saw her die." "Yes. But someone's still using her name. Or her power." A small voice cut through the silence. It belonged to an old woman wrapped in a faded wrapper, her face lined with time and pain. "It's not over," she said. "The pot was broken, yes. But her daughters remained. The ones she never birthed, only mentored." A chill ran through Yinka's spine. Daughters. Disciples. Dust that refused to settle. The girl was buried the next day. But that night, 3 more villagers reported strange dreams, of being buried alive, of drinking blood, of Yinka standing at the foot of their beds with black eyes. By the 3rd night, someone scrawled "Go back to Lagos," cursed one on his window in charcoal, but Yinka refused to run. Not this time. Instead, he sought out the old prayer woman in Ikorodu. She was older now, her one straight back bent like a question mark. When he told her what had happened, she nodded slowly. "You broke the branch," she said. "But you never burned the roots." "Then help me," Yinka said. "Please. I have a family now. I can't let this thing rise again." She handed him a calabash filled with salt, ashes, and white feathers. "Return to her grave. Pour this. But beware. The daughters of dust don't speak with mouths. They speak with wind and fire." And so, Yinka prepared for one last journey. Not to save himself, but to end what he unknowingly started. For good, and beneath his breath, as he packed his bag and kissed his sleeping daughter, he whispered, "May the earth owe me nothing." Yinka arrived in Sagamo just as the sun dipped behind the clouds, casting the village in a strange amber glow. With the calabash wrapped tightly in white cloth, he made his way to Mama Ifan's gravesite, an overgrown patch behind the old market square where the neem tree loomed like a sentinel. He dug into the earth with his bare hands, heart pounding, sweat stinging his eyes. As he poured the mixture into the soil, salt, ashes, and feathers, the wind howled. Not a breeze, but a roar, like a hurricane had been caged beneath the ground and had finally broken free. The earth trembled. And then they came, figures, women cloaked in black. Faces veiled with dust and tears, rose from the shadows of the trees. They did not walk. They floated. Their eyes burned like coals, their mouths sewn shut with invisible thread. The daughters of dust. Yinka stood firm. He began to pray, loudly, boldly, quoting psalms, calling on the God of his fathers, invoking fire, purity, and justice. The wind shrieked louder. One of the figures lunged at him, but burst into smoke just before reaching him. A light pierced the sky. Thunder cracked. Then, silence. The daughters of dust were gone. The wind stopped. Even the air felt lighter, like something old and bitter had finally released its grip on the land. Yinka collapsed to his knees, weeping, not in fear, but in freedom. He returned to Lagos differently. Not just relieved. Reborn. Within months, his phone began to ring again. Old contacts reached out, businessmen, politicians, party leaders. Contracts that had been frozen for years suddenly resurfaced. His name returned to the corridors of wealth and influence. He moved his family back to Lekki, not far from the place where his downfall had begun. But this time, he lived not in pride, but in gratitude. He opened a foundation in Orioluwa's name, helping children from cursed or abandoned villages find hope and education. He built a church, a school, and a shrine of remembrance, not to honor darkness, but to remind the living that kindness must be wise, and not every soul begging for help is truly helpless. And every December, when the harmattan wind blew and the memories returned, Yinka would stand by his balcony, close his eyes, and whisper the words that had saved him, "May the earth owe me nothing." Not every hand stretched in need is innocent, some carry nails for your cross.